like to start every morning here at Autism Live with something that we refer to as the jargon of the day. We know that, and I know, boy, I've got an IEP coming up, and it's jargon intensive on this journey, isn't it? And sometimes it's so frustrating to me, and it can be very overwhelming in the beginning. You want answers, and you pay for money and schedule the time to be with an expert, and they use words that you have no idea what they mean. You ask what the words mean, they say something else that you have no idea what you mean, and you feel like you've fallen down the rabbit hole. Well, one of the things that I learned from parents who came before me is that it's so important to make friends with the jargon as much as you can on a schedule that you can handle, because we don't want to make it overwhelming. So just like we do with our children, we don't try to heap everything on them and have an expectation that they're going to get it all overnight, right? We work on things in very small increments so that people, our kids and ourselves as well, that we can learn something, get comfortable with it, and grow. And over time, we see that that's very effective, that if you start with a little increment here and a little increment here, eventually you can chain a whole bunch of things together and you've gotten someplace. So that's what we want to do with the jargon, a little increment at a time. So today's phrase, is extinction burst. And this is something that you will hear us talk about from time to time. We've had extinction before as our jargon of the day, but I'm sure if you've been watching the show at all, you've heard us talk about extinction burst, and you certainly will hear it again. So we like to give you an actual definition and then give you a working definition, something that's a little less specific, but maybe a little more user-friendly. Okay, so what is an extinction burst? Our actual definition is an increase in the frequency of responding when an extinction procedure is initially implemented. See, this is exactly the kind of definition that I'm talking about. I used to hear these things and I'd go, I don't know what that is. And after the fifth time that I would say, explain what that is, and it would take 20 minutes, I just started taking notes and going home and looking these words up, and these phrases up, and I would see this and go, okay, no closer to knowing what it is. So let's take a look at our working definition. A temporary spike or increase in a problem behavior that occurs when the behavior's source of reinforcement is initially removed or discontinued, i.e. the behavior gets worse before it gets better. And that's really what we want to talk about, is that when an extinction burst happens, it means the behavior gets worse before it gets better. Let me explain what I mean. We've talked a lot on the show, and we'll continue to talk on the show about how we have to figure out what the function of a behavior is. Everything that you and I do is behavior. Everything that our children do is behavior. And any behavior that we do over and over and over and over again, there's a reason why. It's reinforcing in some way. It has some sort of payoff, or we wouldn't keep doing it. Okay? And that's the basic principle that we always want to remember. In order for a behavior to be maintained, for us to do a behavior over and over and over again, there has to be some sort of paycheck for it. And different paychecks for different people, right? But there is a payoff for every behavior that we do on a regular and consistent basis. So if we're talking about a challenging behavior, if we start to look at challenging behavior and go, okay, wait a second, what's the payoff here? And if we see, for instance, well, the payoff for that behavior, the child is beating their head against the wall, and we go through a process of figuring out what is the function of the behavior, what's the payoff for the behavior, and let's say that we discover, and it isn't always this case, but in this particular case, we discover that the payoff is attention, that the child is beating their head against the wall, and what happens when they do that is that everybody stops doing everything that they're doing. They rush over and they shower with the child with attention. And remember that for a child that is doing something for attention, it doesn't have to be positive attention to be reinforcing. Okay? So it could be negative attention, but it's still attention. What we want to do in some cases, we want to absolutely cut off the supply to the reinforcement. So, and I've given a bad example because we want to make sure that the child is safe in that example. So we would have to first make sure that the child couldn't have access to hitting their head against the wall, right? But in other cases, there are times when somebody will be doing something where it's not self-injurious, where we will decide not to give attention to the behavior, where we will just cut off that attention. So when you see somebody in the grocery store and their child is tantruming in the grocery store and they continue to shop and you think, what on earth are they doing? Hopefully it's because they've discovered that the child is tantruming for attention, and they know if I don't give attention, that at a certain point this behavior is going to stop, right? But what we will see from time to time is something called an extinction burst. And what happens is that if the child has been on a regular basis tantruming in the grocery store, for example, and when they tantrum, they get attention, and that has been determined, and the parent says, I'm not going to pay attention to it anymore. And keep in mind, it doesn't mean that you ignore the child, you ignore the behavior. But the child has been doing it for a while and it's always worked. And they got mom's attention, but mom says, nope. As of today, we're putting that on extinction and I'm not giving it any more attention. So mom continues to push the shopping cart along, and the child's having the tantrum and is expecting the attention to come. The attention doesn't come. Now, wouldn't it make sense that the child would just try that much harder to get the attention? Because the child is thinking on some level, hey, wait a second, this has always worked before. It's not working now. I'm going to have to try harder. That's the extinction burst. The child's going to try harder to do the thing that worked before until they get it that, oh, it's just not working anymore. It's if we think about it, you think, oh, that sounds terrible. It doesn't get worse for a long period of time. When we graph behavior and when we graph statistics about behavior, you can see very clearly that a behavior will be happening. It gets put on extinction. We have maybe a little bit of dip, and then a sudden rise on the graph, and then a sudden decrease, and it goes away. So it's a difficult storm. It's a difficult storm, but it's worth it. Usually, what I can remember when we had to put things on extinction, what we would be told is to clear a day or two off of our schedules where we didn't have big important things to do during those couple of days, where we could just give our full attention to that behavior. And I know you think, oh my gosh, I have so many things to do, and really I got to clear my schedule for a potential extinction burst. But you know what? It's so worth it. What we want to be really careful is that what happens as parents especially, and I know sometimes as teachers, I'm a former teacher, is that you implement something and you get in the middle of it and you go, oh no, what have I done? It's making it worse, right? And you have that instinct to stop and say, well, it's not working. Let's totally stop. And that is the exact moment when you got to hang on for dear life, because you have to follow through. If you don't, what the child learns is, oh, I just have to try that much harder. And the next time you do the intervention, the extinction burst is going to be that much worse, that much worse. So we need to get ourselves ready for an extinction burst. When we know that we're going to put something on extinction, we know that it's a great possibility that there may be an extinction burst. It makes sense, right? I talk about this all the time, that talk about a behavior. I go on a daily, every day, I go over at some point in the early evening and I turn on the light switch in my dining room so that there can be light, because the light starts to go. And I know that if I flick the switch, the consequence for that is going to be that the light comes on, right? We all do this on a regular basis. And I've shared before that it's still broken. The bathroom in my master bathroom light, the light switch is not working. Well, it hasn't been working for a good 3 weeks now, but guess what? I still keep going over and turning the light switch on because my body still thinks that that's going to work. Right? Even as I'm doing it now, I go, what am I thinking? This doesn't work. I need to get this fixed. I need to call the handyman and have the light switch fixed. But it is human nature that if something has worked for a really long time, we're still going to engage in the behavior thinking that it's going to work. I am going to get to the point any day now where I just don't turn that light on, and then I'm going to get it fixed and it's going to work, and I'm going to be in the habit of not turning the light switch on. Well, our kids, if they're used to getting what they want through tantruming, they're going to keep trying it for a brief period of time. We need to hang in if we're doing that intervention and not give in the middle, because it will make our lives more difficult at the end. Extinction burst, I think the mantra as a parent that I would always say is, this is the end of this, and this behavior is going to go away. and I'm not going to have to deal with this. This is, you know, the big storm before it all gets quiet. And that's what I would be thinking to myself while we would just go through the motions of whatever we were looking, you know, pretending to do, knowing that we were going to be at the ready for whatever needed to happen, but not giving into it. Not giving into it. Okay, we'll talk more about that. If it's not abundantly clear to you, hang on, because when you see it in your child, you go, oh, that's that thing that Shannon was talking about. It gets better, or it gets worse before it gets better, but it will get better.